trying to get used to this software as well. Okay, so like I was saying before, the FARs are our guidebook as to basically everything that has to do with aviation. So when we go into the FARs here, there's going to be a lot of terms and a lot of acronyms that you guys won't know yet. And if there's any of that, let me see if I can find this. And that's where I'll just go off of this. I'm missing stuff. Hold on 1 second while I figure this out. What's missing? Nope. Nope. Oh, this is embarrassing. I don't know what happened to my Google Drive just now. Anyways, so we're going to go over a lot of the FARs and how they apply to us. In dispatch. And we're going to go over the main ones here. I guess I'm going to have to look them up like this. So the FARs, Title 1, or I'm sorry, we're going to be in Title 14, which is aeronautics and space. So the FARs, there's FARs for basically every aspect of the government, but aviation uses Title 14. And in Title 14, we'll start off with Section 1.1. And in Section 1.1, all the definitions and abbreviations for that you'll see in these FARs are going to pretty much everything is going to be defined in these. And some of the key points that I'm going to point out to you. And some of these you're going to want to write down. So like ceiling. Does anybody want to tell me? Let's see if I can find it here. What a ceiling is?
I believe a ceiling is the base of the cloud to which the ceiling is where the top of the cloud is before you can see the airport, right?
Close. So I've highlighted it here. So the ceiling means the height above the Earth's surface of which the lowest layer of clouds obscuring phenomena is reported as broken, overcast, or obscure, and not classified as thin or partial. So really,
is there any way you can zoom it up?
Okay, let me see. Sorry, I'm on a Mac, and so I don't know how to zoom with the Mac.
Oh, yeah, it's super tiny.
Okay.
Do Control Plus.
Control.
If you have a Windows keyboard, it's the Windows button and then the plus button.
Okay, there we go. How's that?
A little bit more. Yeah, right there's about good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can a little bit further. Okay, so everybody can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the definition I want you guys to write down for ceiling would be the lowest layer of broken or overcast clouds. That's what you have to know and be able to define. And that question will come up a lot, even in the interviews and your practical and oral test. It will come up. So yeah, just basically you have to say it's the lowest layer of broken or overcast clouds. And the way we determine that will be in some of our weather reports. We'll talk about that a little bit more later in the class. But then decision height is another one that we've got to look at. Decision height is specified above the height. A specified height above the ground in an instrument approach procedure at which the pilot must decide whether to initiate an immediate missed approach or continue to land, basically. Which your decision height is basically your go, no go for landing. And then the other one that I want you guys to memorize that you're going to get asked a lot. So I'm just kind of cruising through these right now because the main thing you need to know as a dispatcher is not so much exactly what it says every time. Those things that need to be memorized, I will tell you, they need to be memorized and are key to your job. But
What do you want me to write down for decision height again? Sorry.
basically, your decision height is in an instrument approach is where the pilot in command needs to either execute a missed approach or decide to land. So if he cannot see the runway or the lighting system at that point, he needs to execute a missed approach. And yeah, so decision.
Eric,
Uh-huh.
up and highlight decision height like how you did for the first one. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. And all of these, let's see if I can find it. All of these you can find or follow along with me. I don't know what happened to my Google Drive. I'll have to take a look at that. But there's your decision height. While you guys are writing that down, I'm gonna try to figure out this Google Drive really fast. I'll wait for you guys to be done writing this one down. You can also look all of these documents up on ecfr.gov under Title 14. So let me know when you guys got that one.
I just summarized it. Yeah, I put if pilot can't see runway, pilot needs to execute a missed approach.
Or lighting system. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if they can see, if they can even see the approach lighting system, then they're good. So, yeah.
All right.
All right, you guys, good or?
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. Let me. Sorry, I'm gonna.
It's ecfr.gov.
Yeah, ecfr.gov.
Thank you.
Let me work on my Google Drive really quick because it's going to be a lot easier to read these. On the Google Drive. So.
Which
Derek,
file
is
are you getting into?
It is it should say FARs.
Okay. Just double checking.
Is this in our Google Drive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Nice. Okay, here we go. Oh, so the general definitions is not going to be in. Okay, I'll show you guys my screen again, and we'll zoom in. Okay, so as you can see on this day 2, we're going over part 1 right now, definitions and abbreviations. So your important thing to take away from this is if you ever have a question about a definition or what does this mean or what does this abbreviation stand for, this is the FAR that you're going to go look at, is 1.1. So that'll be in your outline. We'll go back on to here and I can show you the actual FARs. Adam hasn't attached this this particular FAR onto the Google Drive, so you'll have to look it up if you're curious about it. But another one, I'm going to jump to the next one that you guys have to have memorized, and that would be operational control. So operational control is the exercise of authority over initiating, conducting, or terminating a flight. And that one has to be memorized exact. Let's see.
Oh,
Sorry.
This is another one that you will be asked very frequently as a dispatcher. And those are the three that I really wanted to touch on tonight. Really, most importantly, I wanted operational control and sealing. Those ones you have to have memorized, word for word. So that pretty much covers your definitions and everything. I just want to make sure that you guys understand that if you guys have a question on a definition, that's where you go to look. So, sorry, I'm clicking between screens and everything, trying to sort this all out. Okay, FAR Part 25 is our airworthiness standards. Now, I'm not even going to pull this one up. I'm just going to tell you what the topics are that are touched on in this, and if you want to write them down, you can. Just know that this is where it basically states what qualifies an aircraft for transport category airplanes. So it goes over the load distribution limits, the weight limits, center of gravity limits, the performance, controllability, trim, stability, stalls, ground handling, structures, design and construction, power plant equipment, and operating limitations. So those are like the main points that it kind of covers. Again, you don't need to write it down. It's not super important that you guys know what's in there. It's just knowing what qualifies a transport category aircraft. Part 61, once again, it doesn't really apply to dispatchers, but you need to know that, and I believe some of these, or there's a question on the ADX that goes over FAR Part 21, or Part 61, I'm sorry, about pilots and like bottle to throttle, like how many hours is required for a pilot to be, since their last drink till they fly an aircraft. Things like that. So it doesn't really apply to dispatchers, but again, you need to know where it's at. And then FAR Part 71. So let's jump to that one really quick. So FAR Part 71 is the designations for your airspace areas. So
Hello?
we're going to go over airspaces and
Lost you.
Hey, Garrett, if you're still talking, we can't hear you.
can you hear me now? All right. Can you guys hear me now? Can you hear me
I can
now?
hear you now.
Okay. That was really weird. I don't know what happened. The software can get kind of glitchy. Okay. Where about did you guys lose me? about
Just
right
as you were
here.
beginning to talk
You
about the
just said 71 and then nothing.
Oh, okay. So sorry about that. So the part 71 goes over the airspaces. So let me show you a quick picture of the airspaces here. I'll just 1 second while I look it up. Are you guys familiar with airspace at all, or?
I am for the most part.
Okay, so we're gonna go over sky vector, or over. We're gonna go over airspace in part of our training and go way in depth on it. But okay. So we'll look at the St. George area really quick. Let me pull you guys back on. Okay. So here we have airspaces. This map is called a VFR chart. So this is what a pilot would actually use if he were operating under visual flight rules. But it shows the airspaces, better than some of these, like the World High chart. You'll still see different sections, but as we go through these different sections, basically what you guys need to know is that there's certain parts of the sky that there are controlled airspaces. You guys have seen the towers. You guys have seen, around airports, there's different, especially like major airports, you'll have the big control tower, you'll have, a lot of traffic coming in and out of these airports. And airspaces basically set limits and rules as to what's required when going into these airspaces and where these airspaces are going to be located. It talks about, what equipment has to be on board the aircraft to operate in those airspaces. So we'll hit this really hard down the road, but just some of the basics that that we go over just really quick while we're in the FAR is like class A airspace. Not that part. Okay, so this will go into written detail as to what the airspace is. So within 12 nautical miles of the coast of the 48 contiguous state, from 18,000 feet MSL all the way to 60,000 feet MSL. So the airspace from 18,000 feet to 6,000 feet, 60,000 feet is all Class A airspace, and we'll go over what makes that Class A airspace. Class B airspace are these areas over high traffic, like, let's see, we'll pull up Salt Lake really quick. So these are areas just where it's way too busy to have, pilots just tearing holes in the sky, So this Class B airspace is highly regulated airspace, where you have to be in communication with the tower because they got planes coming in and out. And one of the things that we'll go over is this Class B airspace. If you were to rotate this map onto, the horizontal plane, right now we're looking down on it. If you were to rotate it so you were looking at it like from the ground, it would look like an upside down wedding cake. And, you know, sometimes there's like little areas that kind of cut in and out of that Class B airspace, but for the most part, the general rule of thumb is that, and kind of what you want to remember is that your Class B airspaces, if you were to turn them on their side, look like the upside down wedding cake. And what that means is that there's different levels and so about 30 miles away from the airport, you have the top layer of that cake, and then as you get closer to the airport, it narrows down to a, you know, directly over the airport. It's narrower, and so when flying through Class B airspace, there's certain radio communication that needs to take place and permissions before you even enter the airspace. And there's also speed restrictions that are important when flying under Class B airspace, flying through Class B airspace, and we'll go through that. So like I said before, Class A airspace is everything 18,000 feet to 60,000 feet. Class B airspace is like your really high traffic volume, you know, high volume, heavy traffic areas. Class C airspace, it just kind of tears down until we get to Class G airspace. So all of these are controlled. Class G airspace is the only one that doesn't require any communications with anybody and is completely uncontrolled. So that's what's, you know, you guys can read through these if you would like. But like I said before, we're going to really dive into those and dissect each one of the airspaces. But if you have questions about airspaces, this is where we look. Sorry, that's a really long explanation of it, but sorry, got to get it back to the right. Better just close these other ones down. So part 1, once again, definitions and abbreviations. Part 25 talks about airworthiness of the aircraft in the transport category. And then part 61 is for pilots, flight instructors, ground instructors. And then part 71 is your designation of Class A, B, C, D, E airspaces. All right. So that being said, do you guys have any questions about those? We just kind of like jump through those because they're not extremely important to what you guys need to know. But if you guys have any questions on them, let me know. So now we'll jump into this FAR document. And this is going to go over the dispatch FAR. So this part 65 is what this is what talks about aircraft dispatchers specifically. This is we're going to go over the requirements for, you know, what makes you eligible, and we kind of touched on this yesterday. What makes you eligible? What makes a school that can teach teach dispatch? Some of the requirements for dispatchers, and then, you know, it'll go over duty times and things of that nature. So so if you guys don't have any questions up till now, you know, we can just jump right into this, or does anybody need a quick break? How y'all feeling?
I've got a
So-
question.
What was that?
Yeah, so are we supposed to be just taking notes as we feel, or are you going to tell us what's important to write down? And right now
So
you're just kind of telling us where to find information if we need.
right. So for that first part, for the most part, except for those two definitions that like have to be memorized word for word, you haven't really needed to take notes. But yeah, every time I stop and say, okay, this is something that you guys really need to know or have memorized, or this will be on the quiz. I highly recommend you take notes of those topics.
Would you be willing to highlight anything that we need to like write down?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, up till now, more of that is just knowing what's in those sections and where to find them. Does everybody feel comfortable with that? Is there any questions about that?
Not yet.
Okay. And like John posted here in the chat, that website is ecfr.gov, and you will be able to get into any federal regulation. Just remember, it's Title 14. And here's actually one of the questions that's going to be on tests and in your interviews and everything like that. So you'll want to write this one down. When you're asked, what is the dispatch FAR? The exact answer will be ECFR, Title 14, FAR Part 65, Subpart C. So Title 14, Part 65, Subpart C. That is the FAR that basically regulates aircraft dispatchers. So that is one thing I highly recommend that you get down pat.
Yeah, I got to write it down one more time. So you said what?
So it's Title 14. If you're asked what CFR or what FAR pertains to aircraft dispatchers, it'll be Title 14, Part 65, Subpart C. So here's what it is. It's this FAR 65, Subpart C. And Title 14, it's not as required. You really need to get this Part 65 and Subpart C though. Title 14 just means that it's talking about aeronautics and space or something like that. But
What was the question again? Like what FAR just pertains to aircraft dispatchers?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
And-
So
Okay.
FAR 65 Subpart C. So, and I believe that is on quizzes. So you're going to see that several times. So if you guys don't need a 5-10 minute break, then we'll just jump right into this. So this is going to get really dry, and like Adam was saying yesterday, but it's extreme. You know, these are important that you guys know what's in here, and like I said, I'll hit the really important parts, but just bear with me. We'll get through this, I promise. I did this yesterday in training, and I'm doing it again right now. Okay, so does anybody need a break? We good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So certificate is required. So no person may act as an aircraft dispatcher, exercising responsibility with the pilot in command in the operational control of a flight in connection with any civil aircraft in air commerce unless that person has in his or her personal possession an aircraft dispatch certificate under the issued under this subpart. So what that means is that when you become a dispatcher and you are dispatching a flight at any point in time, if you have dispatched or are dispatching a flight, you have to have your certificate on your person. Within arm's reach is really what it is. So when dispatching, you are required to carry your certificate. And that's very important. That's something that even when, like at SkyWest, we have to have that on us at any given time, because an FAA inspector can walk up to you and ask for your dispatch certificate. And if you don't
Is it
have
like a card?
yeah, so it's like an ID card about the same size as your driver's license. So
Okay.
so yeah.
I'll show you later on, Sierra, what it looks like. I have kind of like that.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
If you have a pilot's license or anything, it'll just get it shows what ratings and what licenses you do have. So so yeah, it'll say like aircraft dispatcher, private pilot, things of that nature. But yeah, you're issued one when you receive that certificate.
Cool.
All right, so like I said before, each person that holds an aircraft dispatcher certificate must present it for inspection upon the request of the administrator and an authorized representative of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board. So basically, that's just reiterating what I said. And the NTSB. Does everybody know what the NTSB is and what their role is?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody have questions on that, or?
It's it's right there. Never mind. I'm looking right at it. National Transportation Safety Board.
Yeah. So what they're in charge of doing is if there's an accident or like a crash or anything of that nature, they're the ones that come in and do the investigation of it. So they're not part of the FAA. They're the NTSB, but they work hand in hand with the FAA and make sure that everything is being handled correctly and safely. So eligibility requirements. So we talked about this yesterday. In order to take the ADX or Aircraft Dispatch Knowledge Test, you have to be 21 years of age. You also, in order to actually get your aircraft dispatcher certificate, you must be 23 years old. I don't know why they've decided 23 is the age. You have pilots that are air transport pilots, and they're 18 years old, but 23, 18, I don't understand, but that's the way it is. You must be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. So why is that important? Does anybody know?
English is the like universal dispatching language.
Not
Something like
just dispatch.
All of aviation.
All aviation, yeah.
All aviation, yeah.
So that's actually a requirement, no matter where you are in the world, that you have to be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language when dealing with aviation, because that is the universal language of aviation. So no matter where you are in the world, you communicate the same. You have to pass a knowledge test prescribed by this part. So the knowledge test is your ADX, then the practical test following the ADX. So does anybody have questions on that section?
No.
Nope.
Okay. All right, so let's go over some of the basic knowledge that you guys have to have. And I say basic knowledge, I'm not trying to downplay or say anything about, you know, what level, but really what we're doing in this class is we're building a basis for basically the basic knowledge and laws that you do your job by as a dispatcher, because when you actually go to the airline or to the job as a dispatcher, you're going to be trained on their particular systems and aircraft and procedures. So we're going to build that really good base so that when you do go to an airline, you do have that knowledge and understanding that's required. So you have to have applicable federal aviation regulations of this chapter that relate to airline transportation and pilot privileges, limitations, and flight operations. So that's what we're doing now. You have to have a knowledge of meteorology, including the knowledge of effects or of fronts, frontal characteristics, cloud formations, icing, and upper air data. General system of weather and NOTAM collection, dissemination, interpretation, and use. So we're going to go over a lot of these weather reporting charts and reports that you're going to have to be able to disseminate and interpret, and then apply them to your flights. You have to be able to interpret the use of weather charts, maps, forecasts, sequence reports, abbreviations, and symbols. Your National Weather Service functions as they pertain to options in the National Airspace System, wind shear and microburst awareness, identification and avoidance, principles of air navigation under instrument meteorological conditions in the National Aerospace System, air traffic control procedures and pilot responsibilities as they relate to en route operations, terminal area and radar operations, and instrument departure and approach procedures. So you'll have to be able to do aircraft loading, weight, and balance using the charts, graphs, tables, formulas, and computations, and how it affects the performance of the aircraft. You'll learn about aerodynamics and their characteristics, human factors, aeronautical decision-making and judgment. We'll go over some accidents that have happened and kind of review some of those accidents to help you guys understand these human factors and aeronautical decision-making. I know on the ADX it talks about ADM, or aeronautical decision-making and judgment, and it also talks about some of the human factors that are involved. A lot of your accidents are not necessarily caused by problems with the aircraft. A majority of the accidents are actually caused in aviation are caused by human factors and your decision making. So it's a pretty crucial part of your training. We'll talk about crew resource management, including crew communication and coordination. And you must present evidence. So we basically, so this talks about the actual certificate once you pass the ADX. You have 2 years to take that practical test and demonstrate your knowledge in these areas. So I don't recommend taking 2 years to take your practical. I recommend the second you have the opportunity to take the practical, jumping in and getting that done. So this part basically goes over some of the experience that will qualify you for a dispatcher, but So basically, these will allow you to, in some cases, bypass this training in order to receive your dispatch license. So we'll just go over this part pretty quickly, because what qualifies you guys as a dispatcher, aside from just taking the ADX and practical test, is you are actually fulfilling one of the requirements listed below here. So you have to, if you're in military aircraft operations as a pilot, flight navigator, or meteorologist, then you can basically bypass this training portion and go take the ADX and the practical, and as long as you pass those, you would get your dispatch license. It's not necessarily that you have to go through this course. So if you have 2 to 3 years of experience, or at least 2 years experience in the 3 years before you apply to be a dispatcher, then these are valid. So you can also be under 121, Part 121, and we'll talk about Part 121 because most of our flights are going to be in any of the airlines that you work for are going to fall under 121 regulations. So if you've operated in 121 as an assistant dispatcher under the direct supervision of a dispatcher, or you've been a pilot, flight engineer, meteorologist, or you've been in aircraft operations as an air traffic controller, flight service specialist, or aircraft operations performing other duties as administrator finds provide equivalent experience. And this is where you guys fall, is right here. This isn't something you need to know. This is just, I'm showing you guys what qualifies you guys to get a dispatcher license. And that would be a statement of graduation issued or revalidated in accordance with this part, showing the person has successfully completed an approved aircraft dispatcher course. So that's where you guys lie, and that's how you're able to get your dispatch license. Any questions on that area? Sorry, I'm going to keep asking that, and hopefully before too long somebody has a question. And don't feel shy. There's no dumb questions. I know you guys have heard that before, but like, I'm dead serious. There's not a wrong question or a dumb question. Please let us know if we need to stop. So, skill requirements. So an applicant for an aircraft dispatcher license, once again, must pass the practical test administered or given by an administrator. So that will be Greg Brooks, most likely. So Greg Brooks works at SkyWest, and he's been there for a while, and he's actually the one that administered my test as well. So that will be how you'll be administered the test. And he's going to basically quiz you guys on everything you learned in this course. So yeah, you guys have any questions about that practical test or oral test that he's going to administer?
Not yet.
Anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, so aircraft dispatcher certification courses, content and minimum hours. And this is also another thing that we kind of hit last night. Adam has it broken down. It's just, this is the FAR that tells us that we have to hit these certain topics and for how long. So you have to have that minimum of 200 hours. That's absolutely required and will there's actually some other things that are going to be required with that we will hit in just a little bit. So you must submit an outline on the major topics and subtopics to be covered and a number of hours proposed for each. So that's what Adam went over last night with you guys. And then, so this is just saying that you have to have a breakdown of how those hours are applied. And we went over that yesterday, where we talked about, you're going to spend so many hours in weather, so many hours going over FARs, and so on. So some of the other things that are required. Application for the original approval of an aircraft dispatcher certification course or the renewal of an approval of an aircraft dispatcher certification course under this part must be, so this is again talking about the school, made in writing to the administrator, accompanied by 2 copies. I mean, really not too pertinent to your guys' job. And I forgot something back here that I just remembered. So going back up to the beginning, some things that you're going to need to remember, and I'll highlight them really quick, are these 2 things. So in order to take the ADX, you have to be 21. And you have to be, in order to get your dispatcher license, you have to be 23. I'd write those down. Sorry, we're jumping back so far. All right, does everybody have that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes.
Let me see, where did we leave off? I believe it was right here. So this is another requirement. And yesterday I kind of touched this. We are required that at least 80% of our graduates from the dispatch certification course who applied for the practical test have passed it on your first attempt. So that doesn't mean that, if it's an incomplete or anything, but if you take the practical test, we actually have a standard, and this kind of goes in line with our reputation as the Aircraft Dispatch Academy as well, but yeah, there's actually a requirement that Adam and I prep you as much as we can for that practical test, and there's an actual FAA mandated requirement that 80% of you guys pass it on the first attempt for us to stay a valid school. So that's why we're going to do our best to make sure you guys understand the curriculum. And it's not only that, it's not because we have to, but it's also because it's it's our reputation that we put out there as well, that we prep you guys for that test. So just kind of wanted to touch that one really quick.
You're not talking about the ADX, correct?
No, I'm not talking about the ADX. This is talking about the practical test.
Okay.
So don't worry about the ADX. They know it's almost like the FAA understands what a thorn in the side the ADX is, and so there's not any requirements on the ADX as far as the school is concerned. Because our job as a dispatch certification course is to prepare you for the practical, and that's a lot of the reason why Adam said, if possible, take the ADX prior to starting class, is because we're not going to really talk about the ADX. We'll talk about things that are in the ADX test, but we won't be addressing the test itself directly. We're not going to ask you questions on the ADX or anything like that. It's going to be this class is meant to prepare you for the practical test. So there's just some more information if you guys really want to dive into that section. If you guys really kind of want to scrutinize what Adam and I are doing, that would be the section to go over. So this is basically saying that we have to have facilities, equipment, and materials adequate to provide each student the theoretical and practical aspects of aircraft dispatching. So this is basically saying that we have to provide you guys with all the documentation and information that is required in order to be a valid training facility. And when we talk about the facility as well, the actual physical facility, that's where we're going to be the last 2 weeks. And that, you can't really do that online because it requires not only a lot of teaching and a lot of face-to-face, but as you guys are actually planning flights and things of that nature, it's really important that we are there watching you, answering questions, because it's a flight plan can take anywhere, as we're doing it manually, a flight plan can take anywhere from, when you get really good, they'll take about 2 hours per flight plan. And the first flight plan that we do as a class will probably take us about 5 to 8 hours. So it's a lot of calculations, a lot of figuring things out, and in route planning, weight and balance, all of that. That all comes into play, and so that's where our facility we'll meet at the facility and go over that part. So, we'll provide. We've got all the paper documents in that room to provide. The instruction, the documentation to help you flight plan and things of that nature. So, and it stays nice and cool there. Almost too cold some days. So,
Do you have the address of that location? Because I'm trying to book where I have to stay and everything.
So it's in Washington, Washington, Utah. But yeah, so if you're going to Airbnb, it's a pretty small town. So I don't know if you're looking for somewhere to be able to walk to it, because I don't think there's anywhere that close to it.
If you want my advice, get you one of the get you a hotel at the Marriott Town Place Suites.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's super close to it. You can almost see it from your front door, or from the front door of the hotel.
Okay, and then I would just because Adam was saying I'd have to rent a car, so Marriott.
The Marriott Town Place Suites.
Okay.
If you wanted to stay there, I could totally pick you up on my way.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Okay.
Yeah, that would be totally fine, because I'm going to pass right by there on my way to SkyWest for it from where I live, and I can just grab you on the way. You're on almost the exact same road I'd be going down.
So this school isn't at SkyWest, just making sure.
Oh, you're not going to be, where is it going to be at?
It's actually in Washington. It's called the St. George Academy, or I can't remember the exact name of it. Anyways, it's in Washington. So
Oh,
it's
either way, I
yeah,
can still grab you. That hotel's right by my house.
yeah. So there's that option. Airbnb,
Okay.
if you find a house, I kind of think Airbnb might be cheapest option. I don't know what, who you'd be stuck with. I can't really endorse it, but at the same time, it's probably the cheaper option. But Adam also has discounts through La Quinta as well. So
Okay.
there's several hotels here in St. George. What I would recommend is getting that done as soon as possible. And really anywhere in St. George is within 10, whether it's St. George or Washington or Hurricane or Santa Clara, any of those towns, you're going to be within 15 to 20 minutes of the school pretty much from any one of those places, just as long as you're down in the valley.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So I can even have Adam when he gets on here, he can and he said he'd be on a little later, but he can go over the location of the school and everything if you'd like. So
Okay.
yeah,
Did you say you didn't know what the name of it was?
I can't remember the exact name of it. I'd have to look it up on my phone. But yeah, it's out in the newer part of Washington, like the brand new area. I don't know if you know where Stookie Farms is, but that's the area that it's in.
Oh, so yeah, right by me. I live in Washington Fields.
Okay. Yeah, so it's over there somewhere. I've been to it, and everything, but like I said, I'm brand new to the St. George area, so
Does
I'm still trying.
George Washington Academy sound
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
right? That's the one? Okay,
Uh-huh.
cool.
So, yeah, George Washington Academy is where the classes are held.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, any other questions really quick?
Nope.
Okay.
No, sir.
I'm actually going to have us take a
I
quick
have a quick
breath.
question.
Oh, yeah.
Do people actually, I know it's going to sound crazy, not pass that practical?
There's been one person that I think was made to retake it out of the 5 years or 6 years that Adam's been teaching dispatch. So out of all of Adam's students, there's only been one that's ever failed it. And so Greg, when he is administering this test to you, he's a great guy and he's super helpful and just overly nice almost. But Greg is going to ask you questions, and I guarantee you, there's going to be times when you freeze up and you're just like, you completely draw a blank in the test. And he'll kind of nudge you along, kind of like, well, let's think about this, or why don't we look at this part of the map, or why don't we, and he'll kind of guide you in the direction. And if you're just still not getting it, he'll kind of push you a little bit harder, and then, but there's only certain things that will like hard fail you. Like if you don't understand this aspect of the test, that's a hard fail. Like not listing an alternate when it's requires an alternate airport, like things like that that we're going to go over. That's when there's a problem. But for the most part, when he's administering like the oral part of the test where he's just asking you general questions, he's going to just kind of nudge you along and help you recall the information, because that's a lot of time that's exactly what's needed, right? It's just not like right there. so he's great to work with though, and it's actually a lot better of an experience, and like, I was kind of tense going into it, but at the same time, like once I got in there and met Greg and started to sit down and actually get working on the practical test, all that fear and anxiety went away and I was able to focus. So yeah, he's a great guy. So why don't we take a quick break? I gotta eat some dinner really quick. I don't know who else is in that same boat.
Oh, yeah.
But why don't we take a quick, like, 15 minutes sound good?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's jump back on at, let's just say, you know what, let's just take like a 20-minute break. How about that? Why don't we jump back on at 7? Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, that's great.
That's fine.
Okay. All
Cool.
right.
See you guys then.
Yep. Oh, 60 hours. Okay, there you go. 60 hours of weather. And it's probably one of the parts that most students struggle on, just because there's so much information. But we're going to try to make sure you guys have a pretty good grasp on it. But yeah.
I'm oddly stoked to do the weather part.
Yeah, and I mean, like Adam said yesterday, weather, if you're not into weather, then I don't know that dispatching is necessarily your thing. Because basically, as a dispatcher, you become a meteorologist.
That makes me happy. I looked into doing like atmospheric science and like meteorology as a career field, but after I looked into a little bit more, it seemed like more than I was able to do. So super stoked when I found out that was a part of this.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun actually. I mean, your job as a dispatcher is one of the things that we'll go over in the FARs. Is your job is to monitor the progress of each flight, and then also to not only monitor but issue any necessary information for the safety of the flight as well. So weather is a big part of that. So just kind of showing you guys all this, there's also a book that I can show you guys. It's on Amazon. Here, I'll jump on there really quick and show you what the book looks like. But it's a book that will help prepare you for that practical test. And it's really good. I actually still look at this book frequently. So let me see. So this is the this is the oral exam prep. The new one, I believe the only difference, so on the cover, is that it's green. Instead of this red, it's green. So just look for that. I downloaded the virtual copy because it's like, as you can see here, it's like $12 and you can download the Kindle app on your phone and look at it there. But that'll also be a good prep for your dispatcher exam. And then there's one more.
Do you know if you can pick that up at the library?
You wouldn't be able to. It's not something that they would carry, I don't think.
You can pick it up I believe you can pick it up at Barnes & Noble because I was looking for a book like that and they ordered it for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so just look up the dispatch practical or oral test prep, and it'll pop up. But this is another book. If you guys are interested in some more dispatch information, we're not going to go over anything. Well, we're not going to like reference this book or anything, but I'm just showing you guys, if you guys want some more good information on dispatch, this is another book, and it looks like they've released a new edition of this book. So I'm not 100% sure. I'd make sure you read the description, but yeah, I have this book as well, and it goes over the day-to-day life of a dispatcher. So yeah, just remember that it's extremely crucial that, you know, and that's what we're here for, is this class is directed to preparing you for that practical and oral test. So going back to FAR 65 again, and it looks like Adam's jumped on. You there, Adam? He's there. We can't hear you if you're trying to talk. So, so this section just kind of goes over, you know, the personnel for like the requirements for the instructors. So each applicant for the aircraft dispatcher certification course must meet the following requirements. You must have adequate personnel, including one instructor who holds an aircraft dispatcher certificate. So both Adam and I are dispatch certified and both have our certificates. And we cannot exceed 25 students per instructor. So yeah, so this is just saying that it has to be an aircraft dispatcher. At least one of the instructors has to be an actual aircraft dispatcher. And then we can't exceed 25 students per instructor. And that's a problem, I guess, more that you'd see at like Jeppesen or Sheffield. And what's kind of nice about this course is that so far we haven't had that problem ever. So good class sizes, you know, very manageable. So anyways, this is also the section where we go over the records. So we have to maintain record of each student, including a chronicle log of all instructor subjects covered, course examinations, and the results. So Adam and I keep track of that, and I believe he sent you guys access today of a shared folder on the Google Drive with where we're going to put your test information. So every time we take a quiz, we'll grade it, and then we'll give it back to you guys virtually. So you'll have to virtually send it to us, and then we'll send it back, whether you guys scan it in or take a picture with your phone, however you can get it to us. We'll grade it, mark it up, whatever we got to do, and then we'll send it back to you on the Google Drive. And that's also where we'll post your graduation certificate. So, and Adam has record of everybody, every one of his students, and it has to be retained for at least 3 years, as it says here. So, and basically, yeah, he has to send those documents. I don't know if this is something that you actually do, Adam, but yeah, it says that we have to send them to the administrator. Now, the administrator, I know we kind of talked about definitions and stuff, and we talked about the FAA and FAR. So administrator, every time you see that, that just means the FAA. FAA is our administrator, Federal Aviation Administration. So when you don't see it so much here in these FARs that we covered, but when we get to part 121, it's going to talk about the certificate holder. And the certificate holder, when we're talking about dispatchers, would be you as the dispatcher. You're the certificate holder. But when we talk about certificate holder as far as part 121, when we're talking about 121, the majority of the time it's going to be talking about the airline. So that's just some general knowledge that we're going to, you're going to see that more in part 121. But we also keep track of all the names of the students who have failed or withdrew, together with the results of their certification courses and the reasons for the withdrawal. So like Adam said before as well, and I believe one of our students, or two of them, are return, were unable to complete the course previously for whatever reason it is. And we're glad to see you back, but that's kind of what you guys pay for, is that if there's ever an issue where you have to withdraw from the class, you can always come back and continue the course, and all your hours count. And Adam touched on that yesterday as well. So I'll just kind of leave that at that. And then each student who successfully completes the approved aircraft dispatcher certification course must be given a written statement of graduation, which is valid for 90 days. And then after the 90 days, you must be revalidated. The operator must revalidate the graduation certificate for an additional 90 days if the course operator determines the student remains proficient in the subject areas listed in Appendix A of this part. So what that means is that after 90 days, so after you get your graduation certificate of the course, you have 90 days to take both the ADX and the practical exam. Really, it's the practical exam. The ADX goes hand in hand with that, though. You have to have the ADX passed in order to attempt the practical. So you have 90 days after this course is complete to do that. And I know we're kind of beating a dead horse there, but at the same time, like, it is very crucial that when we complete this course, you guys get it done as quickly as possible, because the longer you wait to take these tests, the more information you're going to lose. And it's just like riding a bike, whereas, if you don't ride it for a long time, when you get back on, it's going to take you, there's a learning process, but you'll catch up, I guess is my analogy today. I don't know. They're great, but yeah, so it's very important that you guys just get it done as quickly as possible. That doesn't mean that after 90 days you don't have a chance. It just means that you're going to be a lot better off the closer you take it to the course. And not only that, but a lot of airlines now, my little brother, he completed the course and took his test and everything, and actually got his certificate. But when he was applying for for SkyWest, actually, there was about a 8-month period where he was not a dispatcher. He was still working at, his previous place of employment. And SkyWest, that was a concern with them, that it had been so long since he had been through the course. They were kind of concerned about what he still retained. So, get your dispatch certificate and use it, because, it's a great industry. I, left my last place of employment, and I took a big pay cut, because this aircraft, the dispatcher industry is just, there's so much more opportunity to grow. in this community. So like all of you guys here are here for the right reasons, and it's really exciting. It's scary, scared me to death making this jump, but it's a great opportunity, and if you love to travel, it's going to be amazing for you. So especially if you come to SkyWest, it's like the best benefits in the entire industry as far as travel benefits. So I recommend you guys not only
Yay.
get the certificate, but you apply yourself and get the job as a dispatcher as quickly as possible. Be relentless. Apply as much as you can. And it doesn't have to be with SkyWest necessarily that you're applying with, but all I'm saying is get out there and use it, because you're going to love it.
Do very many people get hired on with like a larger airline with no experience?
Adam can talk a little bit more to that, but from what I've seen, and I've been hanging around for about 6 years, when I started out, like even to get into SkyWest, it was a long shot on your first try. Typically, you'd have to go to like a place like Ameriflight or Great Lakes, one of those smaller regional airlines, and build up experience before SkyWest would even consider hiring you. That's changed now, and it's kind of crazy because there's such a high turnover rate at SkyWest right now.
My grandpa, I don't know if it's necessarily true, because but I just kind of took it from him. My grandpa, he retired as a 777 pilot, and he still works for Delta. He trains the CRJ 900 pilots in the simulators, and I guess he told me that if you have someone that has good connections to an airline, you don't always have to apply for regionals first. You can automatically just apply for a major. You don't know if you're going to get it or not, but I guess he just said if you know the right people, you could get a good opportunity of going straight into the majors.
Right, and that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that back then, even getting into a big regional they kind of preferred a little bit of experience, but now the big regionals are like picking up people as quickly as they can. So right now is the greatest opportunity you'll ever get with SkyWest over the next year or so. My class is the biggest training class that SkyWest has ever done, and there's 20 dispatchers. Now, I can't tell you exactly what the next class will be or when they're going to be hiring, because I don't know, but they intend to continue hiring almost on a quarterly basis for the next year, and hiring big class, because they're losing people very quickly to, like Adam left to the FAA and to various major airlines. So, and people are retiring. But there are people that jump straight from dispatch courses into the major airlines. It doesn't happen very often, but at the same time, it is possible. And we're seeing a lot more of that now than we ever have before in this industry. So,
hey, Garrett.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me pretty good?
Yay, you got your headset fixed.
Am I coming through pretty good? Just want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, good deal.
Sounds good.
Good deal. So yeah, I just wanted to jump in here for a second and just kind of say, so I've seen people. It obviously is possible, to go straight from dispatch school into a major airline, and people have done it. People that have taken this course in the past have done it. And back when it was at Salt Lake Community College as well. The best chances typically are for people to go into so in the airline environment, you have the major airlines, which would be Delta, United, Alaska Airlines, Southwest, FedEx and UPS also would be considered up there with those. And then you have your mid-major airlines, which are like your JetBlue, Frontier, Spirit, Allegiant, some of those ones that kind of they call them the low cost carriers. And then you obviously have your regional airlines like SkyWest, and there's a lot of regional airlines out there: Envoy, Mesa, Transstates, Republic. You can probably list a whole bunch of them. Now, out of the regional airlines, I think it's pretty safe to say that SkyWest has always been considered by far the #1 regional airline, and it's the one regional that the major airlines hire the most from as well. They're widely considered to have the best training program. In fact, it's even been said that they have the best training program in all of the airlines, even better than several of the major airlines themselves. So it's pretty common, like Southwest will come in and they've come in and taken 15 to 25 dispatchers of ours in one swoop, and Delta has come in and taken a lot. United has taken a lot. And then obviously a lot of them go to other airlines, some of the mid-major ones that I named. So I've had students of mine go directly into like the mid-majors. I've had one that like went to Southwest, although I would say it's extremely rare. Most of the major airlines know that they'll be able to hire dispatchers that have, at a minimum, will have regional airline experience. And that's typically what they prefer. They usually prefer a few years of regional airline experience or even mid-major airline experience. Obviously, the regional airlines, those are the ones that are most prone to, hiring somebody straight out of school. So that's usually the most likely landing spot once you get your license is a regional airline. Obviously, with this program, our intent is to, mirror the SkyWest program, and we obviously have a really good relationship with them. So I always am talking with them. I've talked to the director of dispatch at SkyWest pretty routinely, and he lets me know, when the hiring classes are, how many they're looking to hire, as well as anybody that interviews from this course. He always gives me a lot of feedback as to how people did, as well as the feedback about, overall, I noticed that your students, maybe need a little work in this area, or they did really well in this area. So it's really nice because they give us a lot of feedback. One thing that we're trying to pursue with SkyWest as well is getting in with being basically a preferred school with SkyWest Airlines as well. So right now they do a lot of programs with the pilots. So the pilots are in kind of the same boat as the dispatchers, where they can't hire enough of them, it seems like. There's so many pilots, and the pilot situation is even worse than the dispatcher situation as far as the need to continually be hiring and hiring and hiring, because the major airlines are just taking in all of the regional pilots. And so SkyWest has gone out and they've established a lot of agreements with several pilot schools around the nation to be their preferred school. And that's something that we're trying to do with SkyWest as well. And if we do it, we would pretty much be the only preferred dispatch school, is what we're trying to do. So hopefully we're kind of hoping that comes on later this year, but ultimately what that would mean, like for a course like ours, is that once somebody starts training in our course, they get a hire date as of that day, as well as they get incentives as far as like potential tuition reimbursement and things like that. So it's something that we've been trying to pursue with them, but we just don't necessarily know how far off it is. A lot of it depends on the need for SkyWest and I guess the future of what their hiring needs are. So, but the other thing that I kind of wanted to throw in here is a lot of people also choose to just stay at a regional airline for their entire career. It's obvious, and I think that we've already talked a lot about, if you want to chase money, you can definitely chase money. There's a lot of money in this industry. You can go on to the major airlines. Even the mid-major airlines pay, well into the six-figure range. The major airlines, I think I was saying last night, you can find pay scales up, near $200,000 a year. So the regional airlines, obviously they don't reach that high, but you can still make a really good, decent, living as a regional airline dispatcher. It starts out lower than probably what most people expect, but within the first 3, 4, 5 years, the pay scale actually grows quite a bit. And you can, they put a lot of incentive on people sticking around for at least 5 or 6 years, and the pay scale will reflect it. Your pay will go up, in some cases $3 or $4 per hour per year. So it's definitely
Pay $3 or $4 an hour per year.
In some cases, depending on, like in the first year, you get it like an automatic like $2 raise. Plus, there's other little things that you can do as well to, if that are in the same department, like in the dispatch department, such as like system controller positions. There's tons of opportunity to do training positions and things like that, which also pay overrides. So when I started at SkyWest, I think I was making like a little over $15 an hour is what I started at. I was only there for 5.5 years, and I left making 27. So I was making $27 an hour when I left 2 months ago, and only there for 5 years. So it does grow pretty quick.
And that's just base pay. That doesn't include overtime opportunities, travel benefits. I mean, that's base pay. So
the other thing that you're going to see in dispatch as well, you notice like any other jobs you've had out there, depending on what industry they are, a lot of people don't talk about what they make. But in the airline industry, it's actually very common to discuss how much money you make, because everybody pretty much knows what everybody makes. And, they know the pay scale. They know you've been here 2 years, so they already know what you make. So, I mean, it's widely discussed. So for anybody to throw out their pay or what they're making, it's not them, trying to draw attention to themselves by any means. It's just so common. Like everyone just talks about their pay, and, they're open to giving you an idea of how much money you stand to make based on, how much time you've put in, or based on the position and the override and other things like that. So it's nice in that respect, because you can get a good idea instead of having to have like, I feel like in any other industry, if you're out there, you're asking people, it's like one of those things you don't do. You don't ask somebody how much they make. But in the airline industry, you do. Like, it's just normal and it's expected. So don't, you'll notice that, and for some people it seems a little bit weird, but
yeah, the airline, they publish, everybody's on the same pay scale. So it's almost like government work where, years of service and seniority equals this pay. So
yeah, and the other thing too is we, just being there for 5-6 years like I was, you'll end up having a lot of friends that go to the major airlines, and you always stay in contact with those people, and they always will tell you what they're making, as well. So it carries on to all the other companies, in the airline industry. So, people will text you, I mean, a lot of times, it's to kind of gloat, friends that you're at the major airlines will send you a text message. Oh, hey, I'm making $55 an hour now. How are you liking your 25? Just to kind of rub it in a little bit. There's other aspects though, like I was saying earlier, if you'll notice that you're going to have a large amount of people that their intent is to come in, put in a few years at the regional level, and move on to a major airline as fast as they can. There's another set of people that, and in a lot of cases, like the St. George local people fit kind of more into this crowd. Or even people that are just from Utah. Like I'm from Utah, born and raised in Salt Lake City. So I had been traveling and, visiting St. George my entire life. So when I had the opportunity to move to St. George to work, I kind of looked at it as like, I'm probably going to stay there the rest of my life. And honestly, until the day I left, I still couldn't believe I was even leaving. So I just loved St. George. So you'll have the group of people that love where they live. And depending on what type of person they are, if they're outdoorsy and like that kind of stuff, then you're going to see that there's a large amount of people at SkyWest that are SkyWest lifers. They're not leaving. They have no desire to leave. They, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, not everybody puts the money first. You know, that's not always the most valuable thing in everybody's view. So a lot of people, they like the family life, they like the outdoor life, they like some of the things that St. George offers. And most of those people seem to be mostly, you know, the local people, although there are a lot of people that move to St. George and start working there for the first time that just end up staying there because they like it so much. But then on the flip side, you also have the crowd that moves there and they absolutely can't stand it because, you know, there's one bar in the entire town, you know, and there's no nightlife. And so you have both sides of the spectrum, and I get it, you know, like you know who the crowd is, and you know who wants to stay and who wants to go. And the thing is that the regional airline builds their pay scale based off of that. And the honest truth is they count on having a certain amount of turnover. So there's a certain amount of people that they want to have stay that can grow into the leadership positions and move up the pay scale. And then there's also the certain amount of people that they need to turn over so that their pay scale doesn't get too senior. And, you know, regionals obviously have to try and keep their costs down a little bit more. So, but you can still, in this industry, you can still, you know, if you want to put in your career and staying at SkyWest as an example, you can easily get close to and even make above the 6-figure mark at even just staying at the regional level.
And that's, you know, he talked about the area, but also, like I said before, the flight benefits with SkyWest are literally the best in the airline industry in the United States. I mean, you get benefits with 4 majors, United, American, Alaska, and Delta. So, and then on top of that, you get what's called Zed fares, where you can literally travel the world, you know, and there's partnerships with multiple airlines all throughout the world, where with the Zed fares, you would only pay, what is it, like the tax for the flight, which is pretty low cost. I believe that's generally what it is, right, Adam?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's pretty low, you know, and that's just to fly on whatever airline, you know, if it's like a European carrier or whatever. But, you know, honestly, the best thing is having the direct flight benefits with the 4 major airlines. You know, one person that is Jordan, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on here.
You're probably one that could probably talk a little bit about the value of, I'm sure, you know, with a lot of your friends having been at SkyWest previously, moving on, did they talk much about how much they liked having all 4 airlines as compared to moving on and then just having one?
Yeah, and my brother currently works at ExpressJet, and as Adam explained yesterday, is owned by SkyWest. So he has benefits through Delta, American, United, and all the big airlines. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing. They're not understating it when they say you can travel the world. I literally go everywhere, and you know, in the last couple of months, I've been to 5 new countries. I've been to, you know, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, and it just opens a whole new world to you that even though maybe St. George is lacking in nightlife and other ways, you know, now we can fly directly out of St. George on all of the big airlines, and just with having benefits on so many, it's just the possibilities are endless, and it makes it so much easier to get places. You have so many options and opportunities that, you know, even people at major airlines that only have benefits on one airline, they aren't afforded those same opportunities and choices, you know, of which airline to fly and how to get there, and going through which hubs and major cities. And yeah, they're amazing. It totally changes your life.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because one of the hardest things that people talk about when they leave the airline industry is that, well, when people get into the airline industry, the hardest thing for them one of the reasons they usually stay in the industry is the flight benefits. And people literally can't bring themselves, in a lot of cases, to the thought of not having flight benefits, which is actually something I went through a little bit earlier, you know, this year, a few months ago. Like it literally almost kept me from even taking the job at the FAA, the thought of giving up flight benefits. So it kind of becomes like one of those mental things, like it's worth a certain amount of pay depending on how much you travel. And I've had several trips that we've done, and I have a family. I have 4 kids. I probably should have said that in my intro yesterday, but I'm married and have 4 kids, and including 1.5-year-old twins. So I don't get out too much anymore, but we had a lot of vacations like where we literally had to use all 4 airlines just to get back and forth to where we were going. And I know for a fact that like people that even work at the major airlines can't do that because they're limited to just their one airline. So that's definitely one of the big things about SkyWest that's nice is you will never have better flight benefits regardless of where you work. So,
and I don't know if it's already been said already, but not only do you personally get flight benefits, but you get to put your friends and family on those benefits. And so right now, one of my best friends from St. George is actually in Kauai, and he's going to be flying back tomorrow, and it doesn't cost him really anything to do so, and so your family, my parents, my siblings, my friends, they're all on my benefits and all get to travel and, travel with me and enjoy those same benefits because of working at SkyWest or at an airline.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. In fact, when I took my job with the FAA, I got with one of my friends there at SkyWest. United Airlines actually lets people have what's called an enrolled friend. In addition to their family members that are on their flight benefits, they allow you to have one, or depending on if you're married or not, they let you have 1 or 2 additional friends that you can just add on. So anyway, he added me on as one of his enrolled friends so that I still have United benefits and can fly around a little bit here and there. So that's kind of nice. But otherwise, I don't have flight benefits anymore. So it's one of those things that we're looking at trips this year and we're looking at airfare costs, and it's quite disheartening to know that we can't fly for free anymore.
Especially with 6 people having to fly. I mean, that's one of our big problems is I have 4 girls, 4 kids as well. So, I mean, it's, 6 people. Every time we looked at it, just even flying down to LA to go to Disneyland was going to cost, $2,000. So just as much as our Disneyland and hotel tickets would cost. So we could never justify it. So now being able to do, travel and see the world. There's even guys at SkyWest there's one guy in particular. This guy, he will jump on a plane, fly to Europe on his 3-day off. He'll fly to Europe, spend a day in Paris, and then fly home. And that's how he spends his 3 days off, is almost every single weekend, whether that be his, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or whatever he has off, he travels the world. And so, and things like that, those opportunities are afforded to you working for SkyWest. And anybody that is in the industry can tell you and go on for hours about how much they love those benefits. So.
Yeah, and one thing, it just depends on, like I said, it just depends on what you plan to do individually and in your family life. But if you are, like, for me, like, traveling is very valuable, and it provides like experiences and things for both yourself, your significant other if you have one, and your children that you just don't otherwise have. Opportunities to go places and see things that in real life, if you're having to pay for it and foot the bill for airfare, you're probably not going to do it, and see things. And I've taken my kids around, into all parts of the country and, up into Alaska. We've been to Hawaii a ton, we've been over to Europe, we've been down into Mexico, we've been, all over the place, just, and it's worth a certain amount of money, obviously. And obviously it still costs money to go travel, even when you're not paying for the airfare, but it's just those experiences and things like that you get to have that most people don't get, unless you're extremely wealthy. And a lot of those tickets, if you're flying first class from Salt Lake City to Europe, if you were to actually pay for that ticket, a lot of those tickets can be $10,000 or more. You're getting it for free if if you end up getting first class, that is.
Yeah. So, you guys have any questions about any of that? Or, I mean, this is the fun part of this course, is kind of talking. I kind of enjoy talking about those benefits. It gets me all excited, and part of the dispatcher, another part that I kind of geek out about more is as a dispatcher, we're also in the CAS system is what it's called. And what that means is that every year, part of our training, we actually, and we talked about this yesterday, I believe, for a real brief moment, but you actually have to fly in the cockpit for 5 hours. So being an aviation nerd that I am, it's actually super exciting and an experience that most people will never have. So.
Yeah, and I have a video that we will probably show you later in the course when we're talking about weather. But the last jump seat experience I had, which is about a year ago this month, actually, I actually got to witness what's called a Category 2 approach, it was one of those days in Salt Lake City where the fog was really, really bad, and I was out doing my annual jump seating, and we flew into Salt Lake City with less than about 1,200 feet of visibility. And so you're talking less than a quarter mile. When you see the video, you'll see kind of how crazy it is that we can actually, have planes and pilots that can actually land in these conditions. But it was one really crazy thing to see from the jump seat perspective. So, but I'll show that to you later on. But yeah, this obviously has probably been a good break to, get your mind off of the FARs for a minute, Part 65. I think one of the big things I just kind of also wanted to say, Part 65 is, these are, and Garrett probably already mentioned this before I was able to jump on, but this particular, if there's one thing just to remember what this entire section is about, contains all the requirements for dispatchers, what you have to do to get your license, what you have to do to, as far as the school requirements. So if you want to operate a school, if you want to go to school, if you want to get your license, all of those requirements this is what it is in here, as well as the next part you're about to cover here is all of the requirements as far as what we have to cover in the class. So anyway, I'm going to go back on mute here for a second, but hopefully nice to have a little discussion away from the FARs for a minute.
Yeah, so like I said before, do you guys have any questions? I'll give you a little time to respond, I guess, this time.
No, I mean, I'm good. It's great to hear all those benefits and talk about aviation to excite everybody.
Yeah. All right. So if nobody has any questions, I mean, even the fun questions of, what you're curious about as far as benefits or airlines go, now's the time. If not, we'll continue on here. Sorry, excuse me. Anyway, so like Adam said, this is the part, and these are the subjects that we will cover. And I'm sure you guys will have questions about what some of these are. But anyways, so this is the appendix. So it was one of those subsections that we talked about that let's see. Actually, let's take a quick 10-minute break. Sorry, I had something just come up. Yeah, so let's meet back at 8 o'clock before we go over this. So
Cool.
All right. Well, everybody back on? Looks like it's just you, Matt, so far.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
All right. Give everybody another couple seconds here. All right. So, as I said before, and Adam stated, we're going to go over basically the parts that we're required to cover in this course. And this appendix is just, if you look up above, at some point it says, covered in Part 65, Appendix A. I'm not going to scroll back up there just to show you that, but yeah, so we're required to cover these FARs, and then so this 49 CFR Part 830. This is the NTSB, and this is actually on the bottom of this document, I believe. So yeah, so Section 830 just talks about the NTSB and reporting policies for emergencies and what you're required to do if an emergency is declared. So then the general operating manual. So and then subpart C. So that's the basic documentation that we got to cover, and then we're going to go into meteorology. And as I said before, this is a very extensive part of the course, and talk about drinking from a fire hose. You guys are going to get more information about the way weather works than you've ever wanted to know, I'm sure. But it's all very pertinent to your job as a dispatcher. So we're going to talk about the Earth's motion and its effects on the weather. Analysis of weather types, characteristics, structures, and combinations. Maritime weather, continental, polar, tropical. Analysis of the following local weather types, characteristics, structures, and combinations thereof. So coastals, mountainous, island, plains, and the weather associated with those terrains. The characteristics of the atmosphere, what it's made up of, and the composition, the wind patterns, the ozone, pressure, units of measure. We talk a lot about in dispatch. We use, when we're talking about weather and talking about temperatures and things of that nature. So temperature is always going to be shown in Celsius. So we'll talk about Celsius and then we'll show you the conversion. Really, the easiest way to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit is Google, right? So yeah, I mean, we'll talk about like dew point spreads and why temperature plays such a big part in performance of the aircraft and things of that nature. So we'll talk about the characteristics of the weather systems, temperature effects on pressure, altimeters. So altimeters are altitude measuring devices. So in the airplane, every airplane has, they call it the 6-pack. And one of the instruments that's required to be on every aircraft is an altimeter. And depending on the temperature and other factors, you have to set that altimeter to a certain setting in order to be reading the correct altitude at the airfield. And the pilots have to, it's not like something you set and go, but as you fly throughout the continental US or anywhere in the world, really, it's something that the pilot is updating. Now, when we talk about altimeters as well, once we hit Class A airspace, then that kind of changes how the altimeter set. But anything below Class A airspace, we use an altimeter setting. So that's what an altimeter is. It tells the pilot their altitude, and we'll talk about how that's set and everything. So then we'll talk about the pressure gradient force, pressure pattern, flying weather, talk about winds and the major, who knows what the Coriolis effect is, or Coriolis force. Does anybody know that one?
I do not.
No.
So basically oh, go ahead, do it.
I just wanted to, gloat for a second. I figured, in case anybody didn't know, but yeah, nobody ever heard of the Coriolis effect?
I've
heard of
heard
it.
the term, but I never looked into it.
Okay, so just it's basically the effect of like the Earth spinning,
Oh,
so like as the Earth spins, it creates different wind systems based on the mountains and things like that, and just that force of the Earth actually turning that creates wind.
okay.
So we'll go over all that fun stuff. I'm sure, was it Mike being in the Army? I'm sure. Or no, it was John, I believe. Weren't you in the Army? I'm sure that's something you talked about in the Army as well, the Coriolis effect and how it relates to ballistics of a bullet. So we'll talk about how it relates to aviation. We'll talk about jet streams and their characteristics, local wind and related items, states of matter, solid, liquid, gases, and the causes of the change of the states. So how that relates to weather. We'll talk about clouds, and clouds are actually a huge part of what we do as dispatcher, and probably like all this other stuff kind of leads up to clouds. Like all this other stuff, kind of what it leads into is this cloud section. And we're going to spend some time talking, and it's something you're going to see a lot is clouds and visible moisture, because that's where weather really comes into play. Not only pressure plays with the performance of the aircraft, and then weather is the visual, like we're going to make a lot of our decisions as dispatcher based on the clouds, the formations, the movement, and those weather patterns. So clouds, you're going to learn a lot. The composition, formation, and dissipation of the clouds, types associated with precipitation, use of cloud knowledge and forecasting, fog, causes of formation and dissipation, types, ice, causes of ice. So with icing is a huge problem for airplanes. And we'll talk about why ice is such a big part of aviation and what the effects of ice build up on the structure of the aircraft does to the performance. So we're going to learn about the causes, the formation, the dissipation, the types of ice. Believe it or not, there's types of structural icing. we're going to talk about stability and instability, and basically what causes, again, going back to clouds, like what clouds can you look at, and you can literally look at the sky and see whether or not the air is stable or unstable. And that's something like when I was flying, you learn days that absolutely are horrible to go flying, especially in a small plane, and days that are going to be nice. And you can tell just by looking outside whether or not it's going to be a good day for flying. So we'll talk about temperature lapse rates and convection. Anybody know what convection is? It's not an oven. But
Related to aviation, I do not know.
It's due to the surface heat, isn't it?
The uneven heating of the Earth's surface is what causes convective activity, right? And all weather, right? And really, that's the uneven heating of the Earth's surface is what causes all weather. So convective activity means uplifting force. So that means that the air is circulating in a rising and falling state. So convection will also do with the instability and stability of the air. So, and that's how that's why when I talk about clouds and whether or not the air is stable, you can visually see that in the sky with the clouds. Depending on the cloud type, you'll be able to tell if there's a lot of convective activity or if there's very little. So we'll talk about the adiabatic processes, lifting processes, divergence, convergence, and all of that kind of leads into the turbulence section. Turbulence, we'll talk about, how it's related to the jet stream, pressure pattern recognition, low-level wind shear, mountain waves, thunderstorms, and clear air turbulence. So then air masses, talk about the classification and characteristics, source regions, and use of air mass knowledge in forecasting. So kind of, focusing on this one a little bit, especially over this last year. I don't know if anybody was watching like what was going on in the Gulf. But I mean, we had like the worst hurricane season we've had in a very long time. And it's kind of interesting. We'll talk about this. Hold on just a second. Sorry, my throat's getting a little dry. But it's interesting to learn this aspect, the source region. So, going back to like where it talked about, plains and mountainous areas and, these source regions, when we're talking about the Gulf and why that hurricane season was so bad, is a lot of that hurricane weather actually comes from the heat and the winds coming off the northern part of Africa, and actually creating those weather patterns. So I don't know if you guys, watch that on the news, but it's kind of interesting to see the patterns and the flow of weather throughout the entire world. So we'll talk about fronts, structure and characteristics, both vertical and horizontal. So fronts are, we'll look at a whole lot of weather charts, and you'll be able to see, cold fronts, warm fronts, So that comes under this frontal types. What makes them cold fronts or warm fronts, or what happens when a cold front meets a warm front, or a warm front comes over the top of a cold front, things of that nature. And then we'll talk about the theory of the storm systems. So,
tornadoes.
Yeah. So this part is, summer weather. A lot of this is what we see in the summer. We see huge amounts of thunderstorms in the Midwest and central regions of the country. So thunderstorms and tornadoes, hurricanes, typhoons, see a lot of those. Hurricane, anybody know the difference between the hurricane and the typhoon?
Just the region of the world that they're in.
So
I got a question about the microbursts. About the microbursts. So isn't that basically an invisible tornado-like wind that drops your airplane out of the sky quite a bit of distance if you just fly through it?
So we'll go into depth on microbursts, but it's not necessarily a tornado, it's not. So basically, what happens with a microburst is when there's a very large amount of down. So basically, the air is falling extremely quick and then pushing out, kind of like imagine a helicopter. If you know what rotowash is, if you've ever seen it, a picture of a helicopter hovering above the ground in like dust and stuff, you can kind of see that shape that it forms, that kind of conical shape that it forms. That's kind of what a downburst looks like. You can't see it, but that if you were to visualize it, that's kind of what a downburst looks like. And yeah, coming up to a downburst, or a microburst, the pilot experiences as they're approaching the center of the microburst, they'll experience strong headwinds, which actually creates more lift for the aircraft. And then when they once they've passed through the center of the microburst, and why it's so dangerous, especially because you usually encounter the microbursts on approach to a landing, because microbursts happen close to the surface of the Earth. So what makes it dangerous is the pilot experiences that really strong headwind, which causes the aircraft to gain more lift. But as soon as he passes through the center of the microburst, he experiences really strong tailwinds that actually push the air. If they adjust for the lifting force, then when they get on the other side, they drop really fast and they increase their speed extremely fast. And that's what makes them so dangerous, is because sometimes it pushes them, they lose altitude extremely fast if they're not ready or expecting or even, prepared for the microburst.
Hey, Garrett, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, definitely.
One thing just on weather stuff, we actually, there's a part of this course later on that we talk and we study a lot of the aviation accidents over the years that have occurred. A lot of them, have a lot to do with weather. And so you'll see a lot of videos and things like that of like effects on microbursts and other types of weather as well. But there actually was a specific crash. I can't remember the exact flight number. All the flight, people always refer to them by the flight number, but it was a Delta crash in Dallas Fort Worth back. I can't remember I think it was in the 80s. Yeah. But anyway, it was a a big wide body jet that flew into a microburst that crashed at Dallas Fort Worth International Airport. And anyway, we'll study that crash later on, and several other crashes as well as part of the course to kind of like see how we have learned about the effects. The one unfortunate thing about this industry is that most of our learning and most of the changes that occur usually come from aircraft accidents. And so they've done pretty well over the, especially the last 20 to 25 years of not having aircraft accidents, but obviously they still occur. But a lot of the big changes and a lot of the big topics that we talk about in here are due to aircraft accidents in the past and kind of how they change the industry when they happen. And the thing is what happens, unfortunately, like I was saying, is that it usually takes an aircraft accident to bring things into the light of like, oh no, we need to change this and that and make all these sweeping changes. Does anybody, as an example, remember of the 747 crash back in 2012, the one in Afghanistan? Everybody probably saw videos of it where it took off, and right as it was taking off, it basically just like turned over and went nose down. Right, it was a cargo plane. It only had just the pilots and crew on board, but it did anybody see that video by chance?
Yeah, I heard that was due to a cargo door open. Was it?
No,
it wasn't a cargo door open. It was actually, it was due to some cargo. It was a 747. It was National Airlines. They are a United States cargo operator, and they were bringing a bunch of like armored vehicles back to the U.S. from Afghanistan. And what happened is one of those vehicles was not secured properly inside of the aircraft. And we'll talk about a lot more about this when we get into weight and balance later on. But what happened is as the plane was going down the runway and as it took off, as it went nose, the nose came off the ground and it started to, climb, one of the straps broke loose on one of these armored tank vehicles, and that thing rolled all the way back to the back of the plane. And it caused all of the weight and balance of that plane to shift, and it caused the nose of the plane to go basically straight up into the air. And then, the plane couldn't, it eventually lost, stalled out and lost power, and then, was unrecoverable and went over, and just seconds after it took off. But, whether it's that or whether it's a weather accident or whether it's any other thing, we actually will cover several different accidents in this course and kind of how they changed the industry. The reason I mentioned that Afghanistan one is because it was really the most recent big one, but that accident is still it takes years for the NTSB and the FAA to go in and study these accidents and figure out what changes we need to make from those accidents and implement the changes. So the one from 2012, even though it was 6 years ago, the changes for that are actually now just going to be implemented here in the next year or two. They've studied it and they figured out what the problem was. And anyway, there's going to be a lot of changes coming up in the next year or two due to the 2012 Afghanistan crash. So anyway, I'll give it back to you, Garrett.
Yeah, and that's what's, like Adam said, we learn from our mistakes. It's a lessons learned type scenario. And what's sad is it usually is because of a loss of life or, luckily some people actually walk away from the accident. But yeah, I mean, these crashes are extremely important to go over because you guys, you need to be introduced to the mistakes that were made, and so that when you're in that scenario, you know how to assist. So, yeah, so those microbursts, like I was saying, it's dangerous. These are all very severe. Even thunderstorms are extremely severe, and can actually grow and expand and move extremely fast and create a lot of problems for aircraft. In fact, thunderstorms, ATC has to divert aircraft around thunderstorms. They have to be 20 miles from the thunderstorm. If ATC recognizes there's a thunderstorm and that really high convective activity like that, that creates the thunderstorm, then they have to divert the aircraft around that weather because of how dangerous and how quickly that air can rise, and there's other things in those thunderstorms that cause a lot of damage to the aircraft. And actually just went over one yesterday at SkyWest, an accident where a pilot flew through a thunderstorm and was able to land. It was actually a flight from Denver to Salt Lake. But yeah, he went right into a thunderstorm, and the information wasn't relayed to him about what he was flying into. And I mean, pictures of the aircraft, and I'll share it with you guys at the appropriate time, but the pictures of the aircraft and the damage that was caused to the aircraft, we're talking, I believe it was an Airbus A320, and I mean, the nose is just destroyed. The windshields are completely destroyed. It's crazy what can happen in these weather patterns and why they're so critical for us to see and understand how they work and move, because they're dangerous. Like Iceman said, you're dangerous. So, but yeah, we'll talk about weather analysis and forecasts. So like I said, all of this weather study will lead to how to interpret the forecasts, how to look at trends of weather, observations, surface observations, observations made by certified weather observers, and then automated weather observations. So there's instrumentation. These automated weather observations are done by the ground-based equipment. We'll talk about VORs and other types of these ground-based equipments, but automated weather observations are typically done at those stations and broadcast to the pilots from those stations as well. So, and then there's also certified weather observers, and we'll talk about their role in predicting weather and forecasting weather. So forecast, predicting, I guess there's the same word, but terminal forecasts, we'll talk about those. That's these terminal forecasts, we call them TAFs, but anyways, TAFs are extremely important to the dispatcher role, because that is what tells us whether or not we need an alternate. And then we'll also talk about significant en route reports and forecasts. So, and pilot reports. So each pilot has the opportunity to report. And these pilot reports, we refer to them as PIREPs. And so we'll talk about how to interpret PIREPs and what their role is in forecasting weather. Area forecasts, SIGMETs, AirMets, weather imagery, we'll talk about that, advisories, surface analysis, weather depiction, and significant weather prognosis charts. Winds, temperature aloft, so that'll be key in our planning as well. It will help us understand like whether or not so winds and temperature aloft, that plays a role in our flight planning, because when we're planning our routes, depending on where the winds are coming from and the temperatures, that will help us determine how long each leg of our routes is going to take, and it actually plays a very key role to that. We'll talk about the tropopause, and then composite moisture stability chart, surface weather prognostic chart. So all of these are just charts that that we'll go over, and why they're important. We'll actually use some of these, pretty much all of these charts in our flight planning. So, and then this weather-related aircraft hazards, crosswinds and gusts, contaminated runways. So crosswinds and gusts, I don't know if you guys have ever seen video footage of airplanes encountering crosswinds. If you YouTube it, you can pull up hundreds of videos of these crosswind landings, and they're pretty intense. The talent that these pilots have, flying through some of these crosswinds, especially in landings, it's pretty insane to watch. Contaminated runways. So I've got a friend that lives up in Barrow, Alaska. That's the northernmost city in the United States. And it was funny because, just about 2 months ago, he was flying from, I want to say it was Anchorage, or no, it was either Anchorage or Fairbanks. I can't remember exactly where he was, but he was trying to get back to Barrow, basically. And he sent a picture. He posted a picture on Facebook of Alaska Airlines and hashtag Alaska and Alaska Airlines, and he's like super irritated because half the plane was completely empty. He had to have been flying from Anchorage because it was a fairly long flight, but he's like, how can you guys delay our flight or cancel our flight the day before, and then when we do have the opportunity to fly to Barrow the next day, when we had the opportunity to get there, you guys only loaded half the plane. This is a disgrace. And he was super upset and was like, you're a disgrace, Alaska Airlines, was basically the gist of his message. And I actually ended up calling him up and talking to him about it, because I was like, I told him, I said, well, the reason why your flight was canceled the day before, and I looked up the weather and all the charts, because I'm kind of a nerd like that and just, like to figure things out. But I was like, the weather the day before that canceled your flight was because of a snowstorm at Barrow. Not only that, but so that means that your runway was contaminated, and it even showed in the weather report that you had a contaminated runway. So what that does to your landing performance is it narrows down. Basically, you could have like a 10,000 foot runway, and it says that we have to plan, and we'll go over this, but it says we have to plan to a certain portion of that runway. And there's actually questions on the ADX that talk about this, 60% of the runway, if you remember. And then what a contaminated runway is even reduce that even more. So you only have so much runway that is considered usable runway. And I said, so your airport that you're landing at is not only had poor weather, but the runway still has snow on it. And you've got a long flight. And I said, basically what it boils down to is you guys were weight restricted because, the runway at Barrow is only 7,500 feet long, and you can only you're flying a 737 into there, and you can only use a very small portion of that runway. So if they have too many people on there, that endangers the safety of the flight. And it's these are things that the regular passenger on an airplane would never think about. But I told them, when things like that happen, and when you see those empty seats on an airplane, it's not because the aircraft or the airline oversold seats or they did this or that. It's not necessarily a mistake on their part. It's to ensure the safety of the flight. So, it's kind of funny, and the difference that it makes actually have an understanding of why airlines do the things they do versus just being a regular passenger on the airplane. So long story short, sorry, we'll talk about these reasons and what the hazards are that go with them. Volcanic ash, we've also, we'll talk about going along with the crashes. We'll talk about a flight that flew into volcanic ash, and it actually caused both engines to fail. So volcanic ash is extremely dangerous for airplanes, and it
Was
is.
that sorry, was that recently? Like, was that the one in Bali that just happened? Or okay.
So was it Bali? I can't remember the exact location, but it wasn't.
Yeah, it was Mount Young in Bali.
Oh,
I was
are you talking about this year? Or?
Yeah, the one that just happened.
Oh, no. So there was I'm talking about an actual airline or aircraft incident that happened.
The one we talk about in this class is it was a 747 British Airways flying down it was actually flying out of Singapore down towards, so it actually happened a while ago, but it had all 4 engines fail.
Oh my God.
So, however, that one is one of the rare, well, one of the only ones we have that actually ends up in a happy ending. But yeah, all 4 engines failed, but it was British Airways 747.
Yeah.
Scary. I thought maybe we were talking about the one that just happened in November. Never mind. Sorry, go ahead.
So we'll talk about volcanic ash and the dangers of encountering that. So it's like glue and just completely seizes up the engines. So kind of interesting. But and then here's another one of the big parts that, I'm sorry I keep saying that, but this is another big part that that we talk about, is navigation. So we'll talk about the study of the Earth. We'll talk about time reference. So starting with 0 degrees longitude and the universal time code. So UTC is what aviation runs off of. So when we're talking about forecasts, when we're talking about departure times and things like that, that's all done in UTC, or as we call it in the industry, Zulu time. So we'll talk about what that is. We'll talk about the definitions, projections, charts, chart reading, and application use. So National Aerospace Plan or Airspace Plan. So we kind of touched on that earlier when we talked about CFR 14 Part 71. We touched on this, the airspace plan. So navigation systems, airborne navigation instruments. There's several instruments inside the cockpit that, Adam was talking about the Cat 2 approach. The reason why those things are possible, and when we're talking about major airlines like Delta and United, they can actually do what's called a Cat 3 approach, and what that means is basically they don't have to have any vertical visibility. They don't have to be able to see the runway pretty much until they touch down. They've got a horizontal or a runway visual range that they have to be able to see. But as far as like approach to the airport, they can't see a single thing. And they're able to do approaches like that because of these navigation systems. So those are pretty cool to look at and see how they work. We'll talk about transition procedures, precision approach procedures, non-precision approach, and we'll go over what makes those different. Minimums and their relationship to weather. Special navigation operations. A lot of these, like North Atlantic, Pacific, global differences, we won't go too much into because we don't operate. At SkyWest, we don't really operate at all over these. They're talking about like long distance flying, transatlantic, transpacific, and things of that nature. So we'll touch on them, but it will be very brief. So as far as the aircraft go, this is something that we're going to go over is the CRJ 700. So every time we teach a dispatch course, one of the requirements that we talk about is, like we base our program on SkyWest operation specifications and aircraft. So when we talk about the aircraft that we're going to be using is the CRJ 700. So the CRJ 700 is it's like I don't know, you guys have probably all seen them and probably have flown on them. So we'll go over the systems that are associated with that aircraft. We'll talk about the flight controls, the hydraulic system, electrical systems, air conditioning and pressurization, ice and rain protection, avionics, communication, navigation, power plants, auxiliary power plants, emergency and abnormal procedures, fuel systems and sources. So so the reason why we talk about a lot of this stuff right here is because part of our job, jointly held with the pilot, is the pre-flight planning, and then we're also solely responsible as dispatchers for the safety of the flight. So saying that, when we talk about the safety of the flight and the pre-flight planning of the flight, we need to know, and it talks about it right here, the minimum equipment list or configuration deviation list. If you think that every airplane that you ever have gotten on hasn't had a maintenance issue and been completely just free of any problems, I've got news for you. That's probably not the case. There's almost always something in that aircraft that may be out of service, may not be working correctly. And what this minimum equipment list does is allows us to fly and basically defer, the maintenance until a time that we can get it to a maintenance base or get it fixed. And I mean, we could be talking something as small as a coffee pot machine not working, or a seat being deferred, or a sensor on the aircraft that a problem with the bathroom. but it can also be something as big as the what we call the flight management system, which is one of the ways the pilots are able to do the approaches and stuff that they do, or what we call the APU could be deferred. And there's restrictions for every one of these. When we talk about the minimum equipment list, we're going to talk about the restrictions that happen when certain pieces of equipment on the aircraft are not working. So there's certain procedures that we have to follow in order for the aircraft to fly. So that's the reason why systems are such an important part of the pre-flight planning and the safety of the aircraft is, and I'm sure Jordan can attest to this, that's the reason why it's important to learn these systems, is because we got to learn the implications and what happens when these pieces of equipment don't work. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of scary. I'm sure the person that hasn't been trained or anything to think about their aircraft not always being at optimal performance, but it happens every day, and you still arrive safely at your destination. So that's the importance of that. Performance, we'll talk about the aircraft in general, the principles of flight, Group 1 aircraft, Group 2 aircraft, limitations. We'll go over the weight and balance. Like Adam was talking about, the Afghanistan accident with the 747. I believe it was an M1A1 Abrams tank that was in the back, and those weigh 65 tons. So that's 65 elephants that shifted from a stable position in the aircraft that was in that center of gravity all the way to the tail of the aircraft, which caused it to stall. Because the 747, you guys know how big those are. And for it to do what it did, the video's extremely sobering. But to see that happen, I mean, it's mind-boggling. But yeah, that weight, those 65 elephants shifting in a matter of seconds, you see the exact result of that happening. So, and why weight and balance is so important. And that's a little bit of an extreme. When we talk about weight and balance, that's pretty much going to the extreme. But yeah. We'll also talk about flight instrument errors, aircraft performance, takeoff performance, and route performance, and landing performance. Communications. There's, like I said before, and we'll talk about this in 121. This is another, FAR that you're going to have to memorize. I'm not going to have you write it down now because we're going to go over it, but the dispatcher's sole responsibilities are to monitor the progress of each flight, issue any safety information concerning the safety of the flight, and then to cancel or redispatch a flight. So when we talk about those things, one of the things in there as well is, and going back to the sole responsibilities of a dispatcher, is to have constant communication with your crew. And so communication is a big part of what we do. And not only our communication with the pilots and the crew, but also air traffic control's communication with them. So we'll talk about their responsibilities, facilities and equipment, airspace classification and route structure. Flight plans we submit our flight plans to air traffic control, and air traffic control is basically, they monitor the progress of the flight as well. It's just passed from station to station. whereas we watch the entire progress from, station to state, or the entire route of the flight. So I'll also talk about separation minimums, and that will tie into airspaces as well. So priority handling, holding procedures, and traffic management. So air traffic control, their entire job is to ensure separation of aircraft. And so there's times, this traffic management, there's times where they put things into effect to basically slow the flow of aircraft. Slow the flow, save H2O if you live in Utah. But yeah, so they do these programs in order to, and these different techniques in order to basically reduce the amount of traffic an area is predicted to get over a certain period of time. So we'll talk about that traffic management system. Emergency and abnormal procedures. Does anybody know why we would go over these emergency and abnormal procedures? Somebody spit it out.
Tell me if this is related. I mean, I had an emergency situation when I was working or fueling the aircraft, but I mean, I don't know if it has pertaining to dispatching, but I mean, my fuel truck caught on fire while I was hooked up to the airplane, and so every passenger had to evacuate, and I had to call the airport fire department. And so there's reasons why emergencies have to be, or procedures of emergencies have to be put into place so that it can ensure the safety of every passenger and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and in aviation, we prepare for the worst case scenario every time. And emergency, I think 99% of my ground school and my actual flying time when I was going through pilot training was emergency and abnormal procedures. Like, that's what we spent our entire time. Anybody can fly, through the sky and cut holes in the clouds and land or take off the aircraft, but that's not what they're teaching you to do. They're teaching you what happens if an emergency happens. And it's the same thing with dispatch. We're going to talk about, all these different parts of emergency procedures. Whose responsibility is it to declare an emergency? What happens when we do declare an emergency? Is that the responsibility of the pilot? Is that the responsibility of the dispatcher? What happens, what are pilots allowed to do once an emergency is declared? Things of that nature, because it's important. And like I said before, your main responsibility is the safety of the flight. And we'll also talk about these NTSB reports. And like I said before, or like we've said 100 times, is we're going to go over accidents, and NTSB is the one that does all the investigation. So then basically we put it all together. So practical dispatch applications, human factors, our decision making, situation assessment, evaluation of alternatives, trade-offs, prioritization, and kind of something interesting that when we're talking about prioritization, in my interview with SkyWest, I was handed a sheet of paper that had 5 different scenarios on it, and I had to rate, if I were the dispatcher and all of this stuff happened at the same time, how would I prioritize them? and I had about 30 seconds to a minute to prioritize each one of these emergencies, basically, and the order in which I'd attack them. So it's very important that we talk about that. Talk about contingency planning, support tools, human error, big, like I said before, big part of what causes accidents. So human error is the number one cause, weather is the number two cause of accidents. So it is the majority of the problem here, just our human nature. So whether that be on the individual or the organization, talking mostly about the airlines and some of the pressure that these pilots receive. So, or technology-induced errors. So sometimes having the latest and greatest technology isn't always the best in certain environments, and can actually increase the workload of the pilots to the point where there's errors made. So we talk about that to talk about the prevention of errors and to help us get better. So Evan asked, don't dispatchers plan the emergency procedures in advance? So yeah, so these emergency procedures that we will go over, sorry, I just saw that. So the emergency procedures that we do go over are they're pre-planned. So basically we will go over what happens in an emergency. And we can only plan a certain amount of them, right? We can only plan for so much to go wrong before, you know, there's always going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Outside forces that will change how the emergency is presented, basically. So saying that, we want to prepare ourselves that in a situation where there is an emergency, like we talked about with prioritization and things of that nature, workload, what to do in the event of an emergency, that's what we plan for. Now, and a lot of those procedures are decided on, like how we approach those emergencies has already been determined by the FAA and the NTSB, and even SkyWest. We have our own emergency procedures that we talk about and that we address on a regular basis for when an emergency does happen. But yeah, so we do plan the emergency procedures, but we don't know when those emergencies are happening or going to happen, or else it wouldn't be an emergency. And we've got to be able to adapt to this situation and recover when those emergencies do happen. So that's what it's talking about. So we'll talk about communication and information chains, cooperative and disturbed problem solving. Or distributed, sorry, yeah, disturbed. Maybe I'm getting a little disturbed from all this far. No, I'm sure you guys are bored out of your minds here. But resource management, air traffic control, activities and workload. We'll talk about flight crews, activities and workloads, maintenance. So when we talk about workload, there's critical phases of flight. I don't know, just to get somebody else's voice on here, Jordan, why don't you talk about critical phases of flight and how that impacts the flight crew?
So different critical phases of flight. I think what Garrett is referring to is, you know, at least at United, we separated into things that happen before the flight, like boarding, things that happen at the beginning of the flight, like sterile flight deck as we're taking off, reaching 10,000 feet, and then kind of the middle of the flight, and then again, descent, landing, deplaning again. As a crew member, there's a lot of different things that you're doing in different phases of flight. A big one for, I guess, dispatch and pilots is the critical phase of flight, which is when we're taxiing out on the tarmac and preparing for takeoff. And then again, when we drop below 10,000 feet and the flight crew is preparing for landing and then taxiing to the gate. But the crew's always doing different things to prepare for those things. And, like during those critical phases of flight, below 10,000 feet and again on descent, as a flight attendant, I'm not allowed to contact the flight crew unless there's an emergency or a medical emergency, something that is, they have to prioritize above landing the airplane at the time and manage those workloads. What else, Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. It's just being able to manage. We each, at SkyWest, we, I believe the number that the average dispatcher works in number of flights that we work in any given shift is around 50 flights a day. So as you can imagine, it can get pretty overwhelming when weather and other things get in the way. And it's the same, it translates to flight crew. When they're in those critical phases of flight, as he said, there's a sterile cockpit. There's certain parts of the flight where basically the flight crew is only allowed, unless there's an absolute emergency, is only allowed to think, eat, sleep, breathe, what they're doing at that point in time. So sterile cockpit, they can't have any interruptions because, in those critical phases of flight, they have to focus 100%. Like when they pass through that 10,000 feet, typically they're starting, they're doing their landing pre-landing checklists and they're talking back and forth and just getting ready for that situation, just in case an emergency happens. And so we talk about managing these workloads in air traffic control. They're busy keeping flights separated, airplanes separated. And so if we ask them to contact a pilot because he wants to know the score of the Yankees game at that point in time, and we contact ATC and say, hey, can you relay to this captain that, this is the score of the Yankee game? Like, that's not an acceptable thing to do because it will increase the amount of workload that they have, and it's adding those unnecessary stresses. We have a motto at SkyWest that we work smarter, not harder. So, and I'm sure most of you guys have heard that, and so don't work too hard means that we're thinking about things ahead of time and reducing our workload on the back end, trying to be as prepared as we can. So that's what we go over when we talk about this resource management and our workloads. And thank you, Jordan, for your input on that. I'll probably rely on you for some information because you got a lot of flight time under your belt, I'm sure.
I'll do my best to contribute.
All right. So applied dispatching, talk about the techniques, pre-flight safety, weather analysis, satellite imagery. This is once again, we're bringing everything that we've learned in the previous sections together to create this applied dispatching part. And this is your practical test, basically, is putting it all together. So all of this is information that we just, this is what we finish up on, is the, briefing techniques, the pre-flight, the safety, the weather analysis, satellite imagery, upper and lower altitude charts, significant en route reports and forecasts, surface charts, surface observations, terminal forecasts and orientation to enhanced weather systems, EWINS. So talk about NOTAMs. So notice to airmen, that's what NOTAM stands for. And airport condition. So NOTAMs we'll go over quite a bit too. Talk about the crew and their qualification, limitations, aircraft systems, navigation instruments, avionics systems, flight instruments, operation manuals, performance and limitations, flight planning, route of flight. So that's the practical side of our training here, is when that all comes together, when we use all the information that we received from those previous sections and build a flight plan and actually execute it. So we'll also use in that flight planning time, we'll also use what we call standard instrument departures and standard terminal arrival routes. So we abbreviate these to SIDS and STARS. And I still have SkyVector up, so we can quickly, I can show you kind of what those look like. So what a SID and STAR does is it reduces the workload. We talked about workload, reduces the workload of air traffic control. I was trying to click on, let's see, where's LA? Right here, sorry. So we'll talk about these, and believe it or not, you're going to be able to figure out what all this mumbo jumbo before too long here, and what it means. So when we talk about, we'll go over instrument departures, so standard instrument departures, SIDS, their departure procedure charts. So what this does is this basically puts all the pilots on the same page. When we submit a flight plan to air traffic control, it will have one of these standard instrument departures attached and a star attached to this flight plan. So what it basically does is it keeps all the pilots on the same page. So when they have the SEBI2 departure, basically their job is they're going to be taking off on one of these runways, one of the assigned runways, and then they're going to fly a specific route in a specific, altitudes, climb and heading on a heading of 251, cross this navigation aid and then fly this direction to this navigation aid or this waypoint, and it basically keeps everybody the flow of the airport. So when they say the SEBI2 air traffic control doesn't have to watch them, and when they approach the Seal Beach VOR, tell them to turn to a heading of 022, and then once they reach the SEBI intersection, they don't have to tell them to turn to a heading of 034. So basically it just allows the air traffic controller to say, fly this pattern, get out of my airspace, so that I, can focus on other aircraft in my airspace. And it keeps us separate, all of the aircraft separated. So that's what a departure is, and that's the same thing that a star is it just basically funnels everybody into a nice consistent pattern coming into the airport. They'll fly, once we plan to this VOR here, we can just put on there, this is the arrival that you're going to fly, and it tells the pilot to follow this route all the way into the airport for their landing. So that's what we're talking about when we say standard instrument departures and standard arrival routes. So let's see, where was I at? Okay, nope, this one. And we'll use these a lot. We'll also use the en route charts. And I showed you guys one of those earlier. So this is an en route chart, right? These J, can you guys see that? J9-100-146.
Yeah, they're basically highways you have to follow, correct?
Yeah, so again, reducing the workload of the pilots and the air traffic controllers. When we plan a flight to fly J9, the J stands for jet route, right? J9, that means that once the pilot reaches this VOR, they'll make their turn and they'll fly this route. And these are navigation aids, and we'll talk a lot about this, but these are navigation aids, and they'll fly headings off these different navigational aids in order to reach their destination. So that's kind of touching on that. We'll also talk about fuel. So important with fuel, we've got climb, cruise, and descent, right? Weight and balance, the economics of flight overview, decision to operate, so go, no go. There's certain weather criteria and things of that nature that we have to abide by, that we're limited to operate a flight. You know, cancel or redispatch or delay a flight. Those are all parts of our job. And we're the ones that make those decisions. Delay is in hand with the pilot. Cancel or redispatch is solely a dispatcher responsibility. So ATC flight plan filing, flight documentation, flight plan, and dispatch release. So these are all, you know, that when we're talking about flight planning, this is all that aspect of it. So we are almost done, guys. Just one last little bit here. In fact, yeah, we're pretty much there. So current situational awareness, information exchange, amend if there's a change that happens. So we'll create a dispatch release, and if the weather changes and affects the flight, we have to do what's called an amendment, where we'll go in, we'll make a change to the dispatch release. Once the dispatch release is sent and signed, then if there's any changes that need to be made, we have to do an amendment. So we'll talk about what that, what that means for us. Post-flight, arrival verification, weather debrief, and then flight irregularity reports as required. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much, I mean, that is a lot to take in, isn't it? Does it kind of feel sobering to see all of our responsibilities and kind of
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the day when this is all just like you have everything learned already, and it's just exciting when you get to do stuff with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's, and Adam, I'm sure, could attest to this as well, but that's kind of the fun part of dispatch, though, is that it's an ever-learning environment. You could know the basics of dispatch, and every time you go into work, there's going to be something that happens that makes you go, you know what, maybe I don't know as much about that particular aspect as I should, or I've forgotten about this or forgotten about that. And so you're always learning and always taking that opportunity to get better at your job. But yeah, I can definitely see getting out of training, it's a lot thrown at you at once. But yeah, I mean, do you guys have any questions on any of that? Any concerns? Anything I can help you with?
One of the things when I went and shadowed the job is that it was comforting to know that everybody kind of helps each other out there when you're working on things. You know, if you'd say if you got a problem or whatever, you got people there that know, have a lot of experience. I can step in and help out.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, Evan, this recording, sorry, I'll answer that really quick. This recording should be posted tomorrow night, or tomorrow sometime during the day. But yeah, going back to your comment there, Corey, you're going to be on a floor with other experienced dispatchers, and everybody's there to help everybody, you know. There's some people, some parts of the country are going to have zero weather problems, and other parts of the country are just going to be socked in and horrible. And it's good to know that there's always, you know, whether or not it means offloading a few of your flights or whatever, they're there to help each other. You know, it's a pretty tight niche group of people. So, but any other questions or comments on what we went over tonight?
No?
Not for me.
Nothing here.
All right.
Nothing new.
So we'll you know, we're done with the dispatch part of it. So like it says on the plan here, tomorrow we'll go over these two. So bear with me. We are halfway done with our FARs. And it's, yeah, I promise you this FAR 121, as dry as 65 was, I mean, I was literally just reading through the things that we go over in class, right? Things that I'm sure you've probably already heard and we've gone over a little bit. But FAR 121 is a lot more interesting to go over, and there's a lot more to learn from that FAR. So that being said, if there's not any more questions, then I'll turn you guys loose and have a good night.
Thanks, Garrett.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
No
Thanks,
problem.
Garrett.
Yep.
And thank you.